Hi guys, welcome to another roster review. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and notifications bell just in the corner over there so you know each time we release one of these videos. So today's roster review is actually a really cool one. I'm covering Alex Harrison's Iron Hands list that he just won into the Hellstorm The Bolter tournament with. It's a really cool Iron Hands list. So let's have a look what's in the list first. First of all, the list then. So in the list, Alex has got an Iron Hands Successors, that's the first thing to know. It's an Iron Hand Successors Patrol Detachment and an Iron Hand Successors Vanguard Detachment. So it's a Patrol and a Vanguard, and it all is the same type of Successor. And the Successor traits are Master Artisan, so he can reroll one hit roll or wound roll whenever he fires with a squad for a squad. And also Whirlwind of Rage, meaning every time he rolls a unmodified 6 to hit, with a melee weapon, it counts as an additional hit. He gets 2 hits instead of 1, basically, which is very powerful on combat units. So in the patrol, first of all, he's got his Warlord, who is a Lieutenant in Reaver Armor. He's got the Target Protocol's Warlord Trait, so he can choose a unit and give them 1 reroll to hit, wound, and damage. So, like Master Artisans gives you 1 reroll to hit or wound, this Warlord Trait picks a unit and they get a reroll to hit and to wound and a damage roll as well, just 1 each for the unit. That might not seem that great because you're only rolling 1 hit roll, 1 wound roll, and 1 damage roll, not just all of them for the unit. But when you do it on something and you're going to fire, say you did it on something like a Dreadnought that had missiles on it, you're going to use the rerolls for those missiles to make them a lot more accurate. So it is worth it. It might not seem it, but it is worth it. Then he's got the Vox Espiritum Relic, which I believe gives him auras are 9 inches instead of 6 inches, so he gives reroll 1s to wound to all core units within 9 inches. He's then got 5 Incursors as the troops in this patrol. Incursors can forward deploy, so I think that's why they're in the list, because you'll see something that comes later on that you don't really want your opponent forward deploying for, and a way to stop your opponent forward deploying is get your forward deploying units in first so that they can't go in the space where you've gone. So, for example, say this is the board. It says Dawn of War deployment. So this is a long edge. This is a long edge. You're in this edge. Your opponent's there. So their deployment zone's about here. Now, what you can do is you can put your Incursors 9 inches from their deployment zone, say on this side of the board, on this side. Your board's that big. You put them here like this, 5 of them. Then they block 9 inches like all the way around them. So they're basically blocking off this half of the board for your opponent to forward deploy. So they can only forward deploy on this side of the board if they have anything that can infiltrate like Incursors can. If they don't, then it's not that big of a tool to have in the list, but I believe it's there so that you can stop the people who can forward deploy, and it gives another tool in your toolbox. Also, their objective secured and they're a troops unit. Then there is a unit of 2 company veterans with storm shields in. No other upgrade, just storm shields. Now, they got the bodyguard keyword, and we're going to come to that a bit later on when we explain how the list works. There is also 2 Devastator units, 2 5-man Devastator squads. Each squad's got 3 multi-melters in, 1 Grav Cannon Grav Amp, and 1 Armorium Cherub. He's then got a drop pod. You know, both units of Devastators go in this drop pod. And then there is a Land Speeder Storm. Now, the Land Speeder Storm is empty, but it really helps you play the mission and stuff like that, so it's handy. Also, there is a Vanguard Detachment, a Master Artisans and Whirlwind of Rage Vanguard Detachment. Loads and loads of elites in this army. There's a HQ of a Primaris Librarian in this detachment, who's got the Blessing of the Machine God Psychic Power and the Steel Armor Psychic Power. Now, Steel Armor gives 1 unit +1 to their save. Any Iron Hands unit as well, so it can be done on a vehicle, infantry, anybody. And then also you've got Blessing of the Machine God, which I believe you do on a vehicle, and that vehicle gets +1 to hit. Very tasty. Then there is a unit of 5 Blade Guard veterans, 2 Invicta Tactical Warsuits, which we've not seen in competitive armies on the top tables in a long time. So it's really nice to see that they're in there and doing well. Then there are 2 Relic Contemptor Dreadnoughts with Cyclone missile launchers and 2 Twin Volkite Culverins each. But one of them has had March of the Ancients used on him and Merciless Logic, which we will come to in a little bit. Then there are 2 units of 3 suppressors, which again are units which we're not seeing a lot of on the top tables in tournaments, and it's nice to see them making a resurgence here as well. And then something that's pretty new that I've only recently seen people using, there is a Sycoran Arcus with a Hunter Killer Missile as a heavy support. Now, this is a tank that sits at the back of the board and can shoot units that it cannot see. So that's the roster. Let's have a look at how it all works together. So that was the army roster. Let's have a look at how it all works. The first thing I want to talk about in how it all works is the bit that we mentioned briefly was the 5 Incursors. Now, these 5 Incursors are there for a very specific reason. Now that we've looked at the rest of the list and we know the Devastators are there in the drop pod, we know that that's a great alpha unit. Now, the super buff, I say super buff because it is a super buff. Because the reason why it's called a super buff is your entire army needs to be 1 chapter for you to have this buff, i.e. it's called a super buff. Now, the one for Iron Hands lets you ignore the penalty for moving and firing heavy weapons as long as you're in the Devastator Doctrine, which I think is very powerful, because that means these drop pods, this drop pod can come down turn 1, and your Devastators can disembark, and then they can shoot without any penalty, because they've got heavy weapons. So normally when you disembark from a transport, like a drop pod, you'd be -1 to hit with them. But because you're in the Devastator Doctrine, they can jump out turn 1 and not suffer any penalties. So it's a great alpha strike pod there with 2 hard-hitting units in there that'll both be hitting on 3s, and because there's a signum in the unit, the sergeant can forgo his shooting with a bolter and make one of the multi-melters or grav cannons in the unit have +1 to hit. So they'll have a 2+, they'll be hitting on 2s. There's a cherub in the unit, so that model that's hitting on 2s can fire twice in each unit. They just rip anything apart. They'll kill monsters, vehicles, anything like that. So I think having that drop pod in your army is a massive alpha, but that's where the Incursors come in very handy, because you could deploy your army and go, oh, my opponent's got a drop pod. So what I'll do is I'll slightly deploy backwards with my army, and then I've got this unit of mandrakes or Sycarian infiltrators and things like that, and they go, right, I'll deploy them outside of my deployment zone in front of the rest of my army. So when the drop pod comes down, it has to come down 9 away from my 4 deploying units, and when the guys get out, they'll be more than 24 away from all of my juicy targets, so can't hit me with the multi-melters and stuff. So, that's a big part to the strategy of playing against this army. But that's the thing, if you got to roll off to see who puts the first unit down. So as the Iron Hands player, if you win that roll off, then you can put your Incursors out front in front of your deployment zone before your opponent has chance to put theirs out front, and then all of a sudden you're pushing them right back. I've just killed my Invictor, guys. Oh, it's all right. I'll fix him later. But yeah, if you put your Incursors at the front because you get to win that roll off, and you can choose who puts the first drop down, then it stops your opponent coming forwards, and therefore it's going to be harder for them to stop you alpha striking any of their things in their army turn 1. So that's a big thing. That's how the Incursors and the Devastators in the drop pod work really well as a combination. Now, I like the fact that the Land Speeder Storm's there, and I definitely think the Land Speeder Storm is just a cheap screen. It can fly out to one side and get you like Stranglehold or engage on all fronts or something like that. It can also screen off, again, like we were talking about, like, if your opponent has any alphas or deep striking units, you can just use this Land Speeder Storm to fly off to wherever you need to screen off. So that's brilliant. And then the company veterans. So 2 company veterans with storm shields, and I wanted to talk about these now in a bit more detail because they've got the bodyguard rule. The bodyguard rule states that if a character unit with 9 or less wounds is within 3 inches of this unit, that character unit cannot be targeted with range attacks. Just cannot be targeted with range attacks, even if they are the closest target. And that's what makes these guys so good. Normally with the Lookout Sir rule, if you had a character that was out in the open, you would have to have a unit within 3 inches of him, containing at least 3 models. You'd have to have that unit like closer to the enemy unit than he is, or you'd have to have that unit within 3 of him and have another unit close to the enemy unit than he is, so that other things will get shot in the way to protect your character, which is powerful anyway. The Lookout Sir rule is good. But the reason why the bodyguard rule is so good is it doesn't matter if they are in front of the character or if the character is indeed the closest enemy unit. He just cannot get shot with ranged attacks. So say like this ruin, perfect example. So say I have my unit of 2 company veterans here behind the wall. So you can't see them. They're not on that side. They're over here. You're playing on that side of the board now and you're playing against me. This is my deployment. I've got 2 company veterans behind this wall and that you can't physically see. Then I can put that Relic Contemptor Dreadnought who's had March of the Ancients used on him. Now, March of the Ancients makes a Dreadnought a character, makes them a character. So, and a Contemptor's got 9 wounds, so it's a character that wouldn't be able to be targeted with the benefits of the Lookout Sir rule. Similarly, with the Bodyguard rule, if I put my Dreadnought out here now, he'd be within 3 inches of my company veterans. So if he's out here, you physically cannot shoot him. Even if you get your unit right up to here, right in front of him, you would not be able to target him with range attacks. So that's what makes him so powerful. That's what makes those 2 company veterans and that Relic Contemptor, who's a character, so powerful. He can just come and stand out in the open, being protected from behind, basically, with these 2 company veterans, and he can shoot whatever the hell he wants. He's got 2 Twin Volkite Culverins, so he's got 16 shots at strength 6, -1 if you want. -1 turn 1, and -1 if you want to keep putting him in Devastator Doctrine, which you can do as Iron Hands. Strength 6, -1, flat 2 damage, doing more wounds on 6s to wounds, 16 shots like this. And then on top of that, he's got his 2 missile shots. So he's very, very powerful, and the fact that he can come out there and shoot and not get shot back is insane. On top of that, he's been given the Merciless Logic Warlord trait after he's been turned into a character, which means that when you're resolving an attack for this model, each unmodified hit roll of a 6 means that you can make an additional attack with the same weapon. Of course, those additional attacks cannot then get even more additional attacks, but you've got one lot of additional attacks. So you've got 16 shots with Volkite Culverins. All of a sudden, you can be hitting on 2s if that Librarian casts Blessing of the Machine God on you, because it basically you do it on a vehicle and they get +1 to hit. So that Librarian does Blessings of the Machine God on this character Dreadnought. He's now hitting on 2s, spend 1 CP for Wisdom of the Ancients to give himself reroll 1s, and all core units within 6 inches of him reroll 1s to hit. He's now got 16 shots hitting on 2s, rolling 1s. He should get 16 hits, but 3 of them should be 6s. So he should get another 3 shots, and hitting on 2s, rolling 1s, he should hit with them all. So from his 16 shots, he should get 19 hits, which is incredibly powerful. And then the same with the missile launcher, you know, he's got 2 shots with that missile launcher, hitting on 2s, rolling 1s. Any of those are a 6. He's all of a sudden got 3 hits off 2 shots with a missile launcher that's D6 damage. So I think that's very, very powerful, and I think that definitely deserves to be talked about there. And guys, like, you know, if you come across this in a tournament, just, you know, be wary that if somebody's got 2 company veterans, they will be hiding characters. They will be putting characters out in the open who can shoot you that you can't shoot back. So just be careful of that. So you've got all of that. He's got 9 wounds, so he can't be targeted, like we were saying. He's a character. But the main thing about that is as well, because he's a vehicle with only 9 wounds, he does not degrade. So he's always moving 8 inches, I believe it is. He's always hitting on 3s with his shooting, 2s if you get the power off. He doesn't degrade, which I think is great. And it makes him so much more reliable than if he could. And when you eventually can get to him, maybe you kill those company veterans, you get to shoot him, or you get into combat with him. He's got a 3+ save and a 5+ invulnerable, which is great as well. Then you've got a stratagem you can use called Mercy is Weakness. And this is a great strat. You can use it either in the shooting or the fight phase. So you can do it on one of your units in combat, like Blade Guard, or you can do it on like your Contemptor when you're shooting. And Mercy's Weakness means that when you roll a wound roll of a 6 against one target, then the unit wounds them twice instead of once. And the main thing to remember is you have to pick an enemy unit, and you have to pick one of your units. Now, every model with every gun in your unit that can physically target that unit must target that unit. So you're basically going all into one target, but each time you roll an unmodified 6 to wound them, it wounds twice. So like the Plasma Culverins that have now got, you know, like 19 hits, if they were shooting into, say, 3s, let's say they're shooting into a toughness 6 targets, they're wounding on 4s. Out of your 19, you're probably going to get 10 wounds, but you should get 3 6s in there. So that's 3 extra wounds. That's 13 wounds. You know, it just increases the efficiency by like 30% in that scenario, which I think is incredible. for 1 CP. It's a brilliant 1 CP stratagem. And like the Blade Guard can use that in combat as well. They're the next units I want to talk about. So you've got this unit of 5 Blade Guard. And it might seem a bit weird that there's only 1 unit of them in the army. But the amazing thing is, when there's only 1 unit, you can put all the buffs on that 1 unit, and all of a sudden, they're a very scary, very durable unit that are hard to shift. Whereas if you were to use some stratagems and buffs on this unit, and you had another unit in your army, your opponent would just start targeting that other unit as well. So it probably wouldn't stay alive as often, and I think this 1 unit is actually optimal, so that's pretty nice. Now, the things you can do, you can use Mercy's Weakness to do that in combat with them. Where every 6 is 2 wounds. They've got a bucket ton of attacks. If you do Wisdom of the Ancients on a Dreadnought and he's within 6 inches, then when they fight, they get reroll 1s to hit, so it's amazing again. And most importantly, you can make them tough to kill. Because it's only a 5-man unit, not a 6-man unit, you can use Transhuman Physiology on them for 1 command point, so your opponent can only wound them on an unmodified roll of a 4+. Which is solid. But on top of that, you've got a 1 CP strat called Reject the Flesh, Embrace the Machine, which also gives them a 5-up Feel No Pain. So you can only ever wound them on 4s. They could have a 1-up armor save if you cast Size Steel Armor on them, a 4+ Invulnerable save, 3 wounds each with a 5-up Feel No Pain. They are incredibly tough to take down. The other things I want to talk about here is the stratagem we covered slightly earlier, which was called Methodical Firepower, which is what I didn't say the name of it. And basically, it's 1 command point to put a unit into the Devastator Doctrine. Now, there are quite a few things in this army that would really benefit from that. Now, imagine your Devastator squads have come out in their drop pods and everything. One of those squads dies, the other squad's still alive, or you've got 3 multi-melters alive in the squad or something like that. And your opponent thinks, okay, they're not much of a threat anymore. And then you go, right, I'm going to put them in the Devastator Doctrine so they can move again and then they can shoot without any penalties because they're in the Devastator Doctrine. So it's a very powerful tool for a unit like that, but also the Contempt of Dreads. You know, they've got these 16-shot guns with no AP, so giving one of them AP -1 could make an absolutely huge difference. And the other thing is the final unit to talk about here, which is the Sycoran Arcus. Now, putting it on that would make it AP -3, which is horrible. It basically fires 2d6 shots that are strength 6 -2 flat 2 damage, and it can shoot targets that are not visible to the bearer. So it can shoot out of line of sight, which is great, absolutely amazing. And I think it's required in the game right now, having some out of line of sight shooting, because it deals with your opponent. I mean, imagine now, right? This was in a mirror matchup and your opponent didn't have an Arcus and you had a Sycoran Arcus, you'd be instantly at an advantage because you'd go, oh, right, you've got that unit of 2 company veterans behind that wall, same as mine. And they have 2 wounds each with a 4-up invulnerable save. Yes, they have a 1-up on cover, but my Arcus can be -3 AP, so I will probably pick that unit up in 1 turn with my Sycoran Arcus, and all of a sudden I can start shooting your Dreadnought characters if they're closest to me, but you can't shoot mine. And that would be a massive advantage in a mirror matchup. So I think that's definitely something to mention there. And the last thing in the list is those Invicta Tactical Warsuits. Now, these Invicta Tactical Warsuits, Alex swears by them. I had a chance to talk to him over the weekend because I was looking at them and I was like, are they really that good? They're not cool. They can't reroll their hits. You know, when they get into combat, are they really as powerful as they seem? And then Alex was saying, it gives him that threat of, they could deploy forwards. You never know. So you kind of have to, as an opponent to this list, you can't just go, well, my opponent's not going to put his Invictus forward because there's only a 50-50 chance that he goes first. You kind of got to think, he could put those Invictus forward and he could go first. So you've got to deploy bearing that in mind. And then, you've got to be a bit more reserved. But also, a Whirlwind of Rage makes them a bit better in combat, and Master Artisans. So they go into combat, they've got 5 attacks. They're hitting on 3s. Normally you'd be like, oh, that's only 3 hits. But they're hitting on 3s with 1 reroll. Maybe that's 4 hits. And maybe on one of your 4 hits, you roll a 6 to hit. With Whirlwind of Rage, that's 5 hits. So all of a sudden, instead of being a suit that normally gets 3 hits in combat, now you're averaging like 5 hits in combat because you took the right successors. So, the warsuits are incredible for that. They give him some reliable shooting. They give him some reliable combat. They move very quickly. So I know he's a big fan of them, and I'm starting to see exactly why they're so good. The only other thing to mention is how it all works is the secondaries that this list can take. Now, engage on all fronts is pretty easy for this list. When you've got a land speeder storm, you've got a drop pod coming down anywhere, you've got forward deploying Incursors if you want, and 2 forward deploying Invictors if you want, you can basically get into 3 or 4 quarters in every turn of the game. So you'd be really good at engage on all fronts. The second one is either banners or data, you know, as like the shadow operations secondaries. And the reason why they're so good is because, again, you've got these 5 Incursors who don't really do much damage. They can do an action. 2 company veterans, they can do an action. 5 blade guard who might not always get into combat, they can do actions. And these 2 units of suppressors that move fairly quick. So in a turn where you don't need them to shoot, they can do actions. So I think banners and retrieve data are very, very simple for this army. Engage on all fronts is also very simple for this army. And the other one is to the last. Man, this army loves to the last. The most expensive units in this army are tied at 175 points. Now, one is a Sycoran Arcus. A Sycoran Arcus which can sit at the back of the board and shoot out of line of sight all game. That's a brilliant to the last. The Relic Contemptor Dreadnought, who is a character who cannot be targeted even if he's the closest unit while he's next to those company veterans. He's also an absolute pain to kill and a brilliant thing to factor in your list as a to the last. So he's got a Sycoran Arcus and a Relic Contemptor character. That's 10 points pretty much guaranteed if he plays the game right in every game, which obviously he did, and he absolutely smashed it. So that's a great way of playing it. That's 2 to the last right there. Then the third one can either be your second Relic Contemptor Dreadnought, who you could hide or cast High Steel Armor on, or, you know, bring out into the open when there's not much shooting left on your opponent's side and stuff like that. Or, because that's a bit risky, you could choose the unit of 5 Blade Guard Veterans because they're also 175 points. Now, if you chose the unit of 5 Blade Guard Veterans, of course, you can make them tough, like we were saying, with Transhuman Physiology, and also the 5 up Feel No Pain, so, and putting them on cover and all of that kind of stuff. So I think the Blade Guard Veterans might be a little bit more survivable than the second Contemptor. But if your plan is to sit at the back all game with the Arcus and the 2 Contemptors, your opponent's got to shoot them because they'll have to get through all your combat stuff to get to them in the first place. So that is how this list works. Whew, there's a lot there about how it works. I think it's a great list with a lot of tools. Let's have a look at how we might be able to tackle it or get extra points when we play against it. Right, ways that we can play against this army. So there's a few that I found. The first one, and I really want to mention it because it's amazing that it's in the newest book that's come out, and it's a really cool army. My favorite faction, Auxies. So in the new book, in the New York book, the Rucker Truck Squig Buggies have become absolutely amazing. And the main reason is for the heavy squig launcher. The heavy squig launcher hits on 4s because it's operated by a Gretchen. It's on 4s and it's 2d6 shots, strength 5, -2, flat 2 damage, and it can shoot out of line of sight. When you call a speed war, it can be made AP -3 for 2 turns of the game. Now, people are running 4 or 5 of these. If you're running 4 or 5 of these, you will decimate those 2 company veterans in a turn easily, and then start picking off all of the troops that are hidden that are going to play the mission. You don't even need those squig buggies to go after the big things like the Arcus and the Contemptors, because when the Arcus shoots at a squig buggy, it's damage 1 because the ramshackle ability. And the same goes for these Volkite Culverins. They go down to damage 1. So they're not going to do much to these Rucker Truck squig buggies, but the Rucker Truck squig buggies are going to pick up all of the mission playing units in this army. They'll kill the Suppressors, the company veterans, the Incursors. They'll kill all of those kind of units in 1 or 2 turns. And even the Devastators, when they come down, they'll kill a couple of units, and then all of a sudden, bang, both units are dead to Rucker Truck squig buggies. Like, literally no problem, they will do that. So I think Rucker Truck squig buggies are a great counter to this army. They'll just struggle to play them in general. So on that same note, I wanted to talk about out of line of sight shooting. Out of line of sight shooting things would be great against this army. So, or reach, things that can reach. So what I'm thinking of is things like the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Scorpius Disintegrators. I've been using them myself as well quite a bit now, and I find that they're actually really good. They're a great tool to have in the army. They fire 3d3 shots, and they're strength 5, -1, flat 2 damage, and they can shoot out of line of sight. Now, if you take a Tech Priest, you can make one of them hit on 2s, which I think everybody's doing, including me. And then you can spend 1 CP, and you can make like 2 of them hit on 2s with this one character. So imagine that. You can have 3d3 shots from 2 different tanks, shooting out of line of sight, hitting on 2s, strength 5, -1, flat 2 damage. Every save failed by these company veterans is a dead veteran, and all of a sudden the Dreadnoughts can't stand out in the open because they're going to get shot. So that's a brilliant way of dealing with the untargetable dreadnought thing, and also things that can reach. So things like planes, aircraft who can fly over and reach those company veterans is also great. But outer line of sight shooting isn't just great for those 2 company veterans, because you might think, okay, I'll add outer line of sight shooting into the army. Yeah, if I play against this, it's good against the company veterans, and that's it, really. But no, because as soon as you've killed those company veterans, your opponent does need to leave things behind to be able to hold their backfield objective. Now, what can this list leave? Some Incursors, some Suppressors. Those are units that the outer line of sight shooting will pick up. They're going to put something tough and substantial there. So, it can really influence it, and it can make the person using this Iron Hands list think a lot more about how they position their army. And the next thing is hard-hitting, fast-moving combat units. Now, there aren't very many combat units in this army. The only real combat threat is that unit of 5 Blade Guard. Now, if you can deal with that unit of 5 Blade Guard and then start charging in with hard-hitting combat units, this list is really going to struggle to get rid of you because it can't kill you in combat. Now, of course, like the Volkites and stuff are not blast, so they can just shoot you in combat, but then they must target the thing that's charged them, and next turn something else can come from behind and charge them again. So I think fast-moving combat units, fast-moving and hard-hitting combat units could really put a dent in an army like this. Next thing is fast-moving OBSEC, but this is a trade-off one, because if you're using fast-moving OBSEC, that's the kind of thing that's going to get onto the objectives and deny the person using the Iron Hands list primary points. The thing to be careful of is they do have things like this Sycoran Arcus. So if you have fast-moving OBSEC, normally it's little 5-man units and stuff like that. The Arcus could pick them up before they even get a chance to do something. So it's one of those where you've got to position them correctly, put more threats out there to dissuade your opponent from shooting that specific unit, and that's how you kind of deal with it there. But fast-moving OBSEC that can steal primaries off this list would really help. And last 2 things I want to talk about is slowing people's movement down and mortal wounds. So slowing the movement down, like you could screen off this army to make it move slower and it can't walk through you. And obviously nothing's really got fly except for the suppressors. So they're going to get trapped behind you if you can run up to them really quickly and stop there, because they can't walk over you. So it'd block them in. But also things like Doom Bolt, other stuff like that, where it halves your movement and your advances and stuff like that. I think those are incredibly powerful tools to use on an army like this, because if you can slow down that Blade Guard unit, it's going to take these guys longer to reach the middle of the board and objectives and stuff, and you can win on the mission that way. And mortal wounds. Man, this army does not like mortal wounds because it is so elite. Now, I know you can get a 5 for Feel No Pain and stuff like that, but when somebody chucks out like 15 mortal wounds or 16 mortal wounds, like some of the new units may, like Grey Knights or Thousand Sons, we don't know yet. Those armies may have answers in mortal wounds or be able to do a load of mortal wounds. This army does not like that. It does not want to get hit by mortal wounds, because everything you're paying for in this army, you're paying a lot of points for. So, it would be rough trades if that were to happen. So those are the different ways that I'd go about tackling this army. And let's just go about and see what modifications / adjustments we could make if we wanted to use this army. The modifications. Now, I actually really like this list and the way that Alex has written it. I think it's pretty much perfect. The only thing that I would maybe do differently if I was going to use the list, and I think this is player preference purely, because, we've gone through why absolutely every unit is in Alex's army and what role it performs. So, he's got some great things there for how it works. Now, so I think it's purely boils down to player preference at this point of what you would change. But the only thing I would change is I would put some Vanguard veterans in the list. Now, I'm not a big fan of those 2 suppressor units or the Blade Guard unit. Now, you've got these 2 suppressor and Blade Guard unit, and that's like 400 odd points when you point it all together. But you could swap those 2 suppressors and the 1 unit of Blade Guard out for 2 to 3 units of Vanguard veterans. Like 3 5-man Vanguard veteran units with Storm Shields and Lightning Claws. If it's not enough points, you can jiggle them around a bit to find another 20 points or so to take it. But 3 units of 5 Vanguard veterans with Storm Shields and Lightning Claws, I think are a lot bigger threat than 1 unit of Blade Guard and some shooting that isn't that reliable all the time because it's only 3 suppressors. So I would definitely drop the 2 units of suppressors and the Blade Guard unit and swap them out for 3 units of 5 Vanguard veterans with jump packs, Storm Shields and Lightning Claws, because it gives your army a lot of counterpunch then, because there's loads of shooting in it. but it'll have loads of shooting and amazing, great counterpunch, which is what you're looking for. And on top of that, I would change the successor traits to Whirlwind of Rage still with the Exploding Sixes, but then Born Heroes. I don't think the Master Artisans is doing that much for this list, but Born Heroes would, because if you took 3 units, and I think at the moment it doesn't seem like it, but if you took 3 units of 5 Vanguard veterans and all of them were hitting on 2s on the charge with Exploding Sixes, you would soon see the difference. So that is probably the only modification I would make. Take Vanguard vets and change your battle traits, your chapter traits, to become more beneficial for those units that you're taking. So that is to this week's roster review. I really hope you've enjoyed it. That was Alex Harrison's Hellstorm GT winning Iron Hands list. If you guys have got your own feedback on the list or any ways that it could be improved or different ways to play it, maybe some stratagems that I've missed that you think people need to know about, please leave them in the comments below for everybody to share, and hopefully we can grow as a competitive community like this. And until next week, guys, stay safe, play loads of 40k, and I'll see you later.